All right, here we are talking about coaching. As usual, I'm here with Siwash and Nicki. Hey.
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 I'll jump straight in. I keep getting questions around the benefits and pitfalls of recording coaching sessions. Not just for evaluation's sake, such as like an ICF accreditation, you need to record sessions with a client, but more and more it's about use of AI. Right. Initially, I had some requests from clients to record their sessions because they enjoyed going back to the session, and that I really appreciated. Right, when the client requests it and then the client gets the recording and they listen back to it as kind of an outside observer to the conversation, I think super helpful. Right, and there is a moment where I'm like, ooh, but I'm being observed. What if this is like seeing the light of day one day when I'm like very rich and famous perhaps, and like one of those recordings get up, see what a shitty coach Yannick is, because we all make mistakes here and there. So that there's a moment, but then very quickly that's gone and you can contract with the client. But in the age of AI, I've seen a number of coaches making it a requirement. I met someone we have in the coaching lab next week. Jonathan Wrights, he sits at the intersection of AI and coaching, and he made the most kind of, it didn't feel bold to him, but it felt bold to me. He's like, I don't work with clients unless we record the sessions. Right, because he's in the US, it's also quite litigious, and he's like, part of this is to have a legal backup, right? But it's also, there's opportunities when you record your sessions with AI to offer you summaries, or it can distill the actions agreed upon, main themes talked about. So it can sort out all a coach's notes if you work for a platform, BetterUp or Ezra or one of these kind of platforms. So you can just upload your notes from the coaching session without like dreading it. I have a supervisee who just keeps procrastinating about it, and then once a month he like spends all Sunday just typing up his notes to the platform, right? So with that, I think AI can really help. But when you transcribe a session or you have an AI summary, it also gets recorded, and then where does it get stored? And then I connected with a platform that wanted to onboard more supervisors, and it turned out that the supervision was actually the AI flagging transcripts as in a certain color to highlight something that may be problematic, right? Problematic language used or something like that. And then the supervisor, and for those who are listening to this, very much air quotes, would, more traditional sense of supervisor, as in like quality control measures, would then review the transcript, see if it's problematic, and then reach out to the coach for a conversation. But it meant that all of their coaching sessions are transcribed. So they're all recorded, not all video recorded, but at least recorded for the transcription. And I think that on some level, coaching clients, how open will they be when they come to coaching and they know it's being recorded, right? So I think the younger the generation gets, the more okay people seem to be with being recorded. The resistance to it certainly has gone down considerably, and I've noticed that, especially if there's not a camera in your face, but there's just a little red button flashing that you forget about almost immediately, right? So I think unconsciously it must do something to a client knowing that this is being recorded. How open are they really going to be? How deep are they really going to go? How vulnerable are they really going to show up? So if it's one-to-one, that's already something, because it's stored somewhere. It might be on data service with Zoom, or where the data service hosted. If it's stored on German servers, I'd be feeling more comfortable about it than if it was another country service. There's so much around data protection that there's a lot of. So there's a long story short, right? About the question, there's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of potential pitfalls, and I know coaches are wondering, should I record my coaching sessions? So, with all that context, let me put it to you. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, the biggest benefit I've seen is that what you mentioned first is that clients watch it again or listen to it again. And I've had one particular client that would listen almost to every session twice, right? Well, not twice, well, once in the session, and then he would listen to it again, right? So he would always get a lot more out of the coaching. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits with AI. I use AI also for every session, and I really find the summary and the transcript really useful. So the summary I share it with clients. The transcript, however, I'm using it for the different purposes. One, we're using it to create content out of that, right? But when we create content, we will make sure that the identity of the client is protected, so there's nothing that can reveal who the person is. But then we can use it for content that can benefit other people.
What
right?
kind of
So
content are you talking?
Marketing content. So, for example, let's say we basically I put a prompt through the transcript that says, for example, that summarize here the questions the client asked, right? Now that can be used for marketing content. But again, having said this, like my primary focus is always the client. If the client at any point says like, hey, I'm not comfortable recording, I will always turn the recording off. I will not argue that, because my number one focus is always the client is the number one priority, right? Not the marketing purpose, not anything else secondary, right? For me, if it will stop there. If the client says, hey, I'm not comfortable with the recording, we'll stop there. There's not even a discussion. But if the client's comfortable, and I find, to be honest, I think you made an interesting point at the end. Does it get in the way of the client fully showing up and fully being open and vulnerable? I found that
the client might say yes, right? But they might not want to say no to you, because they like you, they want to get coached by you, and if you say, hey, look, we could record this and it could be really valuable, and like, are they really going to say, no, I don't want that? I mean, you would hope so, right? But
I think that's a good point. That's where I guess it really depends on the relationship, whether the person feels even comfortable saying no, because some people, they have that level of, they know where to draw boundaries, and others are maybe thinking like, oh, well, he's the coach, I should just let him do what he wants, right?
They're just massive people pleasers.
Yeah. I think the distinction between like serving versus pleasing is really important. That's why I think as a coach, we need to first bring the focus back to the client. What serves the client, and really creating a safe space to say, hey, if you don't feel comfortable, or if it gets in the way at any point, we can just pause it. I've had times where a client's comfortable at the beginning, but then in the middle, because they feel safe enough to say no, they're like, hey, can we just pause this here? We're like, okay, we'll pause it here, right? And I think that's the important part, where the other person feels safe enough to say no.
Yeah, and that can be very subtle, right? I think we need to be really able to read people's subtle signs of discomfort, because there's many ways to say I'm not comfortable with it other than with words. Right? And especially when you start a coaching relationship, you might not quite have evened out the power dynamics and really meet someone at eye level. Or, like I said, they might have people-pleasing tendencies, or it can be tricky, because depending on what narrative we come in with, people really want the coaching and they really want to work, and they might not want to work against the way that the coach suggests that this would be helpful. So if the coach comes in with, I tend to record my sessions, how do you feel about that? Is it really a how do you feel about that question, or is it are you going to be okay with that, or are we going to have a problem? So I think that's the first point. I appreciate all of the value that this is bringing in. So I have a little Claire Beth McManus sitting on my shoulder, which is a colleague of mine who's like super ethically aware, and she would definitely raise an eyebrow when it comes to creating content out of coaching sessions. I also sometimes tell stories or draw questions from what happened in my coaching sessions, obviously. I think the main thing here to be aware of is, might a client recognize that this is from their session when they see the content out there, right? Because I don't really think that most clients would have an issue with that when they recognize, oh, this is from my session or this is from my context. But some might feel uncomfortable knowing that this is being marketed, and so there's a question around what do you contract for? What's the contracting conversation about the recording and how it's being used? Would you tell your clients that some of what we do with the transcript might be used for marketing purposes, and don't worry, I'm going to anonymize everything. There's nothing in there that will make somebody else be able to identify you. Maybe you'll be able to identify yourself. How do you feel about that?
I think just another point is I think there's a little bit of a culture around, obviously when we talk about coaching, we're most of the time referring to people that have gone through a certification and they understand the ICF regulations, right? But if we think about the online world, 80% of what we call coaches, they haven't gone through an ICF training, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little bit of the online culture is, record everything, use AI to repurpose things, use things, right? But I think that sometimes the priority shifts there from marketing versus actually the client, right? Mm-hmm. And I've had times, for example, where I was in a program where things were used with my name, and I'm like, hey, I'm not good with that, and I actually need to make a point about that, right? And even if my name isn't used and it's used in marketing straight away, it still feels uncomfortable. So one of the things that we do is we usually delay it 1 month or 2 months. We don't do it straight away, right? But I think the important thing is, I think if you look at it from the ICF perspective, I think you're not even allowed to keep recordings or data, right? Like you need to get rid of it. So I think, I think there's two complete. I think one of the problems is this whole culture that's created around, that it's all about marketing, and I think we want to shift the focus. We want to make sure that the focus is actually first on the client.
Yeah. Jonathan made a really interesting point. He said, from his perspective, like a recording, a transcript, or taking notes aren't really different from a legal perspective, right? So whether you keep your notes, your written notes, your handwritten notes, or you keep a recording or a transcript of a session, it's sort of the same thing. It's not quite, but it sort of is. So I kind of get where he's coming from. And there are plenty of other coaches out there. So if for your process this really works, I think as long as this is made clear, I don't see a problem with that. I see a problem when it's not really clear. And how much time are you really going to spend talking about this? Sometimes the more you talk about it, the more uncomfortable it might make someone. Where's the ethical line in this? Let's give another try. Nicki just popped back in. Nicki, Are you with us?
I am for now.
Well, what are your thoughts? You missed a chunk of that conversation, but maybe it gives you a fresh perspective.
Yeah, there we go. Let's roll with that. I think it's such an interesting question. I think, part of my background is philosophy and moral philosophy, and I don't know, for me, a lot of the things that intuitively came up are around kind of, probably a more ethical standpoint. I think, as with everything, it's a double-edged sword, and I think, it's quite nuanced. I can see there would be a lot of potential benefits to recording sessions, to have that material to go over, to have, the input of AI in addition to whatever you talked about in your coaching sessions. All of those things, I think, carry a lot of potential. What I find perhaps more tricky is, I don't know, and maybe this is a very personal kind of thing, but it's a bit like taking a photo and freezing a moment and eternalizing that moment, and doing that with each and every coaching session I have. For me, it reduces the kind of, maybe the human process and processing by creating all this kind of archival status, like material to go back and reflect on over and over and dig into again and again. I wonder if it takes away from that, that process that we have as a human, having had a conversation, but then also kind of letting it fade into the background and continuing our reflections, thinking in the present and moving forward, rather than kind of almost dwelling on each session at this new level of digging into it more and deeper. I don't know. But where we're talking about the potential and the quality of for the coaching itself, I think, of course it raises the bar and can help us go deeper into each and every session. But again, whether that's actually beneficial for the process on the whole, I think is another interesting question. If that even makes any sense to you guys, because I wonder if that's a very personal thing.
Well, I think it really depends on how we're using the data afterwards. For example, Rebecca Rutschmann, a colleague of mine here in Germany, works at the forefront of AI in coaching. She created a mentor coach AI, where you basically can upload your transcript, and it gives you actually really, really good feedback on whether to what extent you hit the markers of ACC and PCC style ICF coaching, right? And it gives you, based on the transcript, specific timestamps of what you said and what you could have said differently, or how you could have said it differently. What you've done really well, which competencies you've ticked off really well, which ones were maybe a development area, and that's really good feedback for your coaching development, right? So I would encourage every coach to at least occasionally record their coaching sessions, even if it is clearly with a practice client and very much, maybe not as part of your process, but like just as a separate kind of training dojo. And yet, if anybody's listening to this and just imagining doing it, I want you to notice your response to that, right? Because most of us, and me included, I never listened back to my own podcast. I've never listened to any episode of what we've done here, right? Because while I've spent a lot of time in the studio, like I recorded an album once, and I had to listen to my voice over and over again because I was producing it, right? So I desensitized myself to a serious degree about hearing my own voice, but most people cringe when they see themselves on video or hear themselves on the recording. And yet it's one of the most profound learning and rich learning experiences you can have, because I have that sometimes in supervision. People send me a session, and then on the basis of that session we run supervision, right? Not as a mentor coaching approach, but like just being able to have an unfiltered version of what actually happened, rather than the already filtered narrative that a coach might bring to supervision. We tell the story differently to what actually happened because we're already interpreting it. Right? So it's really, really rich ground for learning when you have an actual recording, and then yet most coaches won't do it. And similarly for the client, and the client goes through the session and keeps learning from it, great. But how often do you really look at your notes? I look at my notes briefly before the next session just to bring the last session back into mind and maybe check what was agreed, maybe check back into the contracting. But if I were to record any sessions, I don't currently, but if I was, I could probably pretty much delete them straight after I send my client a summary if I were to do that. Right? You would have to set a reminder to delete the recordings or the data. There's different requirements in different countries. But you need to destroy your notes at some point by law, depending which country you're in. Sometimes it's 5 years, sometimes 7 years, sometimes 3 years. So that's a legal requirement, and yet most coaches aren't really aware of that, of the rules and regulations in their country. And I think that's the same for notes, the same for recordings, it's the same for transcripts, it's the same for summaries of sessions.
Yeah. I think that's actually a really useful thing. I haven't done that. You can upload, for example, 10, 20 supervision books into AI, and then get AI to supervise, basically give you feedback on your coaching. The other thing that actually came up for me is 3.5 years ago, I paid $10,000 for a coaching session, a guy called Steve Hardison, and part of the rule was you're not allowed to record it, right? And it's a 2-hour session, and part of when I was preparing, I was thinking okay, I need to be super present, I need to be very prepared, I can miss things, right? And I think it's interesting because part of me was thinking I'm going to miss out on things because I can't record it, right? But then there was a really positive impact on that because I was a lot more present, I was a lot more prepared, and I remember actually I tried to keep eye contact as much as possible, so I had 4 pages of scribbles on my iPad, and I went back to the hotel room, spent another hour, and the 4 pages of scribbles became almost 17 pages of notes, right? I remember going back again and again to think what else didn't write down, right? And I actually get a lot more out of that process because there was no recording. right? And I think it will probably have a different impact on everyone, and that I think that thing happened, or that I probably acted like that because my sessions were always recorded with my previous coaches, even though I never listened to the recordings. But like just the idea of having access to it gives you this thing like, oh, if I miss it, I can rewind and go back to it. I think a lot of that comes from I think a lot of that comes from this whole, I think that when we're used to recording, the recording probably gives us a little bit of a safety net, like, okay, I can just be fully present. Because I've had this before with people, like, people say like, oh, is this recorded? I'm like, yes, it is. And they're like, okay, then I can just be a little bit more present. I don't need to write everything down. And I think we all have a different kind of relationship with the recording.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to underline as well, because there is a different version of that if it is recorded, people relax much more into the moment because they're not so nervous that they're going to miss something, and then they're actually much more present. Whereas for you, it was the opposite, right? Because it wasn't recorded, you were a lot more present.
Yeah, but it started with a lot of that FOMO, like, I'm going to fear of missing out. But then it's like, well, let's just get present with it.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of why even clients probably want recording, is this fear of missing out. And again, they maybe go 5% of the time go actually back to the recording, but it gives them that bit of relaxation.
Yeah, I can certainly see that oh yeah, it's being recorded, so I could always go back, but then you very rarely do. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm still kind of stuck on the unconsciously how open would you really be, and I think it does depend on your relationship with my data being out there, because when you're meeting in a room in person with someone, it definitely, everything stays in the room no matter what, right? Yeah. I mean, some people say the phones are listening, right? So, but like, let's assume in this scenario every recording device stays outside the room. It does feel really, really safe, and the quality of the space that we're holding is so crucial to coaching. And
so
if there is doubt about how safe is my conversation, because with the best intention of the coach, there might just be a server breach somewhere where this recording is being stored. Like, everything's in the cloud these days, everything is managed somewhere, the responsibility gets pushed around. Like, it doesn't have to be any fault of your own, and then there's a data breach, and then that conversation is out there. Like, a lot of people share really sensitive information, and a lot of people don't really care about that. But like, as soon as it gets to an organizational level, or to a level where there's information shared could actually be really causing some damage and harm, it doesn't even have to be a conscious process, right? So depending on what I come to coaching for, I would not consider that. But then hopefully we get that relationship at eye level, where we can pick up that somebody might be uncomfortable with this, and give people a way out when we offer it, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there's a lot to think about. I don't take that decision lightly, and I haven't offered it for even that reason yet. Some clients say, can I record? I'm super happy to do that, but I wouldn't offer it as of now until I've kind of figured that out. I don't see the extra benefit of like being more valuable than the potential risk at this time.
Yeah.
But that's me.
And I think it would be good for coaches listening to this to experiment, right? Like, if you're always recording, just don't record the next 5 sessions and see how you show up and how the client shows up, because I do think there's a little difference there, and actually just all those secondary benefits really, they can be very useful with the right intention. Like, you want to maybe help more people get more clients, and by marketing, but all of that can still be done without the recording. It just takes a little bit more work. Like, I can sit after a session and think about, hey, what are some things that could be really useful that I could share, right? I think sometimes we use AI almost as to save time and to as a shortcut. And I think the important thing is for coaches to come back to, especially certified coaches, I think, to come back to, like, what is really the important thing here.
Yeah. Cool. Nicki, any last words?
I'm really sorry. I've changed location now, but I missed most of that. So I will enjoy listening back to this recording and write any questions in the comments.
Cool. Then let's close it here. Let's see if we can squeeze one more in. Thanks, guys. All right, that was us talking about coaching. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I appreciate your commitment to being the best coach you can be. I always say, if any of this resonates, make it swing. We grow through conversations. So if you found value in this episode, please go on and share it, or with another coaching colleague of yours or a friend. Anything that we can do to help people get inspired to reflect more on their coaching and be better coaches. I really believe in the generative impact that coaching has. So if you wanted to support the coaching and this mission, then what you can do is share this, right? Talk to somebody, send the link to someone, have that conversation with someone. What would really help us is to leave a positive review or a rating on one of the podcasting platforms. Generally, the more people we reach, the more time and effort we can put into creating these episodes for you. And higher quality means also more conversations, maybe inviting high-profile guests into the conversation. That'd be a dream of ours. So you can make this worth it. And I appreciate you being with us, and I appreciate you considering to help. So thank you. See you soon. Send us a question.